oversee this project going forward will make the determination of what can the Tri-County CAP service as it exists do, what can the other organizations that provide service or could potentially provide service do, and how do we pull these things together so that we aren't missing the people that aren't on the route.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Well, it would appear to me that however you set this thing up, you're going to be in some ways in the same business as CAP. And therefore, your other services are going to be taking the business away from North County Transportation, which I can't say for a fact, but all of those people that I've seen and with my own eyes, doesn't seem to be loading the bus everywhere they go. And you'd be just taking away more ridership from that organization. How do you justify that?
I would say that the transportation that the Tri-County CAP service is providing is reaching those folks who are able to utilize it. I'm comparing the public transit masses that need to access services as being an iceberg. People have been discouraged over years of making calls, I need to get here, how do I get there? They can't get there, they get discouraged and they stop calling or stop trying. You know, New Hampshire today isn't the New Hampshire of 50 years ago. It isn't even the New Hampshire that I knew when I came up here in 1985. What we had 50 years ago and beyond were large extended families. Our kids stayed close to home. They were there to support us when we needed to get around. You know, they could do things for us to help us out. Now, we have much smaller families in New Hampshire. The kids have grown, they've gone to college, they've moved out to get the jobs they need, and the parents, the elderly, the seniors, the disabled are out there. And if you have one bus running up and down the street, or just a couple of feeder streets off this central route, what do you do with the rest of the folks? How are they getting to where they need to go? They're begging and borrowing and imposing on neighbors and friends. Well, there's networks in place that if we can just communicate what is actually out there, we can actually reach them and help them and get them more engaged in the community, as well as maintaining their health, which is, you know, the other side of the coin.
Can you give us an example of another county that's rural like Carroll County and how successful your organization has been?
Yeah, I think the most effective single thing I could say would be to look at Keene. Keene has just started a service a few months ago where, using one of these 5310 grants for purchase of service, they have put a bus on the street in Keene that will go to the VA hospital at White River Junction and then over to Dartmouth Hitchcock Hospital. Now, there's not a fixed route system in the state that can do that, but they're doing it for their citizens using this 5310 purchase of service through the RCC process. Other good examples that are starting to get underway would be to look at the coast service down to the south and the ACT Board, which is an RCC. They're providing some service which comes into the southern tip of Carroll County, southern tip of Carroll County, but they have a very active board that is exploring a number of opportunities and possibilities for expansion of services that will provide transportation, even if it's on a limited basis, to specific communities that they've never been able to provide service through coast. So things are starting to roll. What is making the difference now, and this is where I laugh with the RCC committee that I'm working with, is that by being last, we're actually in a great position, because as all these folks were trying to figure it out, there was no money on the table. What we're saying now is, there's the money to actually do something. And if we can roll some of those funds through a regional transportation coordinator down to a volunteer organization that can go to a person's home and bring them to where they need to go, at half the cost of what it would take to send another type vehicle there, we've accomplished some good. We've allowed that volunteer network to actually achieve funding, which helps them sustain their network. Many of these volunteer organizations are struggling purely on a volunteer basis and losing volunteers every day for a number of reasons. So we need to take and energize and activate these organizations into the existing public transit infrastructure. Yes? Excuse me, the chair should ask.
That's okay.
Yeah.
Yes. The state, it says state and matching funds. Who are the matching funds?
Matching funds can come from a number of different sources, and the various grants are different. They all need to be explored. Matching funds in some cases can be volunteer work on committees. It can be assisting in phone call taking. It can be grants from another federal source. 10 or 12 years ago, if you had federal transit dollars, you could not match them with other federal dollars. Well, the federal law has changed in that regard now. There are 63 different federal funding sources for transportation. You can now leverage many of these funds one against the other. And so there's no single answer as to where the matching funds come from.
Yesterday at the meeting that I attended, this interesting statistics for the data from 2005 to 2009. Here in Carroll County, there are 19,035 occupied housing units. Of those, 758 do not have a vehicle. So 758 houses, there's no way of them to get to wherever they have to go unless they get some sort of transit.
Mr. Albee.
And it's certainly fascinating, the graphs that can be created. The no coordination graph seems very chaotic, which I think is the point you're trying to make. And then we get a centralized coordination. My question is, obviously there's some money changing hands here, because you have a funding agency and then you have the recipients, if you will. And what you've done is you've put in play a RTC to coordinate. And I'm wondering if you could tell me that in your business model, how much of the funding actually stops in the middle and how much of that gets down into the actual providers of the services? I mean, you're a not-for-profit, which doesn't mean you're not getting paid.
Well, certainly we're getting paid.
And you're looking at grant money, and I'm wondering how much of that grant money is actually going to improve the transportation and how much of it is going to be in the form of coordination.
You know, that's a really interesting question, and the fact of the matter is it will probably vary in terms of the percentage that is going to be held in operations for the RTC is going to vary from region to region. Why? Because different regions will have more volunteer availability. Some regions will find it necessary to hire more taxis or liveries. It depends on the business that needs to be done. But
so is that a function of your RCC to establish what sort of benchmarks you're going to have for Carroll County, for instance?
The RCC will have the oversight and the governance of the expenditure of the funds. And so they have the right to hire the RCC, and they also have the right to recommend the firing, the RTC, and they have the right to fire them if they think that their costs or charges are too high. What has happened, quite frankly, around the state is that, for the most part, the fixed route services within the regions have become the RTCs. And what that does is allows the fixed route service, because they have the infrastructure in place for the most part, to manage all the contracts and to assign trips most effectively via dispatch, via tracking and reporting, and computer technology where it's available. They have become the RTC, but the role of the RCC is just governance. And so what happens with all these different funds flowing into the public transit network, they're able to leverage many of those funds against the operating costs of their existing fixed route service. One key challenge in this state with regard to running a fixed route public transit system is that this state is probably 49th in the nation in terms of providing funding support for public transit. Running a public transit agency requires 50-50 match on your operations side and an 80-20 match on your admin side. This state, when I ran Concord 4 years ago, Concord area transit on a $900,000 budget got about $22,000 a year in state support. Now we know that times have gotten even tougher in the last 4 years, and that support from the state has gone down. So they, in order to even maintain what they have to find other funds that they can leverage to replace the state funds they've lost. Handling the contracts with volunteer networks and others provides the opportunity to make up some of that lost match for their standard operation and potentially provide greater service than they were providing previously through the development of the network. And by the way, just as a point of information, the two graphics that you point to there is you can do wonderful things with graphs. Those two slides were developed by the Department of Health and Human Services and provided to me for this. So that is their perception, having participated in this process, of what's going on. That is not my graphic.
It makes me more skeptical.
But they're right. I feel they're right.
This is a non-governmental operation, essentially, or
Okay.
exclusively. And yet you're getting, for all intents and purposes, all of your money through government grants. What are you using as an arm to get those grants? I mean, I can't go and get a government grant for public transportation unless, and I think we do an awful lot of grant pass-through here at the county, the commissioners do. I mean, what are you using to facilitate those government grants?
I'm not sure I understand the question. I mean, we use the expertise we have on the street. We use the...
No, I'm thinking of oversight. Where I was going with it is, you're using public funds in a private setting. What is the government oversight? When we have pass-through of grants from at the county level and it goes into the private sector, for all intents and purposes, we have oversight over the spending of that grant money if we want to exercise it. Is there the same sort of oversight on your operation?
The RTC's books will have to be open books. Just as any public entity, their expenditures and things have to be cataloged. In a fixed route service, we had to actually break down our budget into like 85 different articles for the federal funding sources, both on the admin side and the operations side. And that type of detailed bookkeeping will be required by any RTC. It's only good governance that you make sure that you're paying money for something, you're getting value for what you're paying.
You might tell the military that.
Are there any county government participation in any of the RCCs?
From the county commissioners?
Funding.
Oh, funding?
From county government?
At this time, I'm not aware. I haven't explored that at all. My role at this time has been purely to get the RCC up and running and pointed in the right direction going forward. So although I've had a number of meetings at the state level and I'm familiar with many of the projects around the state from previous work, I don't know the answer to that specific question.
Okay, any further comments from the public or from the commissioners? Yes, Ed?
Ed Camo, GovernmentOversite.com. Commissioner Solomon had asked you about the matching funds, and I didn't hear a clear answer of who, from the nonprofits, like who is helping fund those matching funds.
Well, what I had said was that the matching funds can come from a number of sources. Some of it is in-kind match that can be donation of volunteer time, can be considered match in some instances. Every grant is somewhat different in what they allow for match or not match. And as I said, with the change in federal law with regard to the use of federal funds to match federal funds, you can literally get a DOT grant from DOT funds from the federal government and get a health and human service grant to, or an expenditure. Say, you could use elderly and adult services monies that you might be contracting to provide elderly and adult services can be used as match